Chapter 8 of The Secret Passage. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Secret Passage by Fergus Hume. Chapter 8. The Course of True Love. The most obvious thing for Cuthbert to do was to seek Juliet and ask for an explanation of her mysterious note. He went to the Shrine of the Muses the very next day, but was informed that Miss Saxon and her mother had gone out of town and would not be back for a few days. He could not learn where they were, and was leaving the house somewhat disconsolately when he met Basil. "You here, Mallow?" said that young gentleman, stopping short. "Have you been to see my mother?" "I went to see Juliet," replied Cuthbert, not sorry that the meeting had taken place, "but I hear she is out of town." "Well, not exactly. The fact is, she and my mother have gone down to Rose Cottage, and intend to stop there until the funeral is over and the will is read." "The will?" echoed Mallow. "Yes. Aunt Selina is likely to leave a great deal of money. I expect it will all go to Juliet. She never liked me." "Yet you were frequently at her house." "I was," confessed Basil candidly. "I tried to make myself as civil as possible, so that she might remember me. Between ourselves, Mallow, I am deuced hard up. My mother hasn't much money, I have none of my own, and old Octagon is as stingy as he well can be." This sounded well, coming from an idler who never did a stroke of work, and who lived on the charity of his stepfather. But Basil had peculiar views as to money. He considered himself a genius, and that Peter should be proud to support him until, as he phrased it, he had stamped his name on the age. But the stamping took a long time, and Basil troubled himself very little about the matter. He remarked that genius should not be forced, and loafed away the greater portion of his days. His mother kept him pocket money and clothes, Peter supplied board and lodging, and Basil got through life very pleasantly. He wished to be famous, to have his name in every mouth and his portrait in every paper, but the work that was necessary to obtain these desirable things he was unwilling to do. Cuthbert knew that the young fellow had been "born tired," and although something of an idler himself, liked Basil none the more for his laziness. Had Mallow been poor, he would certainly have earned his bread, but he had a good income and did not work, and, after all, he only pursued the way of life in which he had been brought up. But Basil was poor, and had his career to make, therefore he certainly should have laboured. However, for Juliet's sake, Cuthbert was as polite as possible. "If I were you, Saxon, I should leave the cards alone," said Mallow. "Nonsense! I don't play high. Besides, I've seen you at Maraquito's also losing a lot." "I can afford to lose," said Cuthbert dryly. "You can't." "No, by Jove, you're right there. But don't preach, Mallow. You ain't such a saint yourself. Can I help you with a cheque?" Basil had good breeding enough to colour. "No, I didn't explain myself with that," he said coldly. "And besides, if Juliet comes in for Aunt Selina's money, I'll get some. Juliet and I always share." This meant that Juliet was to give the money and Basil to spend it. Mallow was disgusted with this candid selfishness. However, he did not wish to quarrel with Basil, as he knew Juliet was fond of him, and moreover, in the present state of affairs, he was anxious to have another friend beside Mr. Octagon in the house. "Perhaps Miss Loach may have left you some money after all," he remarked. "By Jove, I hope so. I'll be in a hole if she has not. There's a bill." Here he stopped, as though conscious of having said too much. "But that will come into Juliet's possession," he murmured. "What's that?" asked Cuthbert sharply. "Nothing, nothing. Only a tailor's bill. As to getting money by the will, don't you know I quarrelled with Aunt Selina a week before her death? Yes, she turned me out of the house." Here Basil's face assumed what may be described as an ugly look. "I should like to have got even with the old cat. She insulted me." "Gently, old fellow," said Mallow, seeing that Basil was losing his temper, and having occasionally seen him in fits of uncontrollable passion. "We're in the public street." Basil's brow cleared. "All right," he said. "Don't bother. I'll be all right when Juliet gets the money. By the way, mother says you're not going to marry her." "Your mother is mistaken," rejoined Mallow gravely. "Juliet and I are still engaged. I do not intend to give her up." "I told mother you would not give in so easily," said Basil, frowning. "But you can't marry Juliet." "Why not?" asked Cuthbert sharply. "Do you know the reason?" Basil appeared about to say something, then suddenly closed his mouth and shook his head. Cuthbert pressed him. "If you know the reason, tell me," he said, "and I'll help you out of your difficulties. You know I love Juliet, and your mother does not seem to have any excuse to forbid the marriage."
"I would help you if I could, but I can't. You had better ask Juliet herself. She may tell you the reason."
"How can I find her?"
"Go down to Rose Cottage and ask to see her," suggested Basil.
"Your mother will not admit me."
"That's true enough."
"Well, I'll tell you what, Mallow. I'll speak to Juliet and get her to make an appointment to see you."
"I could write and ask her for one myself."
"Oh, no, you couldn't. Mother will intercept all letters."
"Upon my word!" began Mallow angrily, then stopped. It was useless to show his wrath before this silly boy, who could do no good and might do a deal of harm.
"Very well, then," he said more mildly. "Ask Juliet to meet me on the other side of the Rexton, under the wall which runs around the unfinished house."
Basil started. "Why that place?" he asked nervously.
"It's as good as any other."
"You can't get inside."
"That's true enough, but we can meet outside. I have been inside, though, and I made a mess of myself climbing the wall."
"You were inside?" began Basil, then suddenly appeared relieved.
"I remember. You were there on the day after Aunt Selina was killed." "I have been there before that," said Cuthbert, wondering why the young man avoided his eye in so nervous a manner.
"Not at night?" murmured Saxon, looking away.
"Once I was there at night. Why do you ask?" "Oh, nothing, nothing. I was just thinking it's a wild place in which to find oneself at night. By the way," added Basil, as though anxious to change a disagreeable subject, "do you think Jarvey Hale a nice fellow?" "No, I don't. I have met him at Maraquito's, and I don't like him. He's a bounder. Moreover, a respectable lawyer has no right to gamble to the extent he does. I wonder Miss Loach trusted him."
"Perhaps she didn't know of his gambling," said Basil, his eyes wandering everywhere but to the face of his companion.
"But should you think Hale would be hard on a fellow?"
"Yes, I should. Do you owe him money?"
"A few pounds. He won't give me time to pay. And I say, Mallow, I suppose all Aunt Selina's affairs will be left in Hale's hands." "I can't say. It depends on the will. If everything is left to Juliet unconditionally, she may take her affairs out of Hale's hands. I should certainly advise her to do so. He's too intimate with Maraquito and her gambling salon to be a decent lawyer."
"You do seem down on gambling," said Basil, "yet you gamble yourself a lot. But I expect Juliet will change her lawyer. I hope she will."
"Why?" asked Cuthbert sharply.
"Oh," replied Basil, confused, "because I agree with you. A gambler will not make a good lawyer, or a good husband either," he added in an abrupt tone. "Good day.
I'll tell Juliet," and he was off before Mallow could find words to answer his last remark. Cuthbert, walking back to his rooms, wondered if it was on account of the gambling that Mrs. Octagon objected to the marriage. He really did not gamble much, but occasionally he dropped into Maraquito's house, and there won or lost a few pounds. Here he had often met Basil, and without doubt the young man had told his mother, but he could hardly do this without incriminating himself. All the same, Basil was a thorough liar and a confirmed tattler. He might have blackened Mallow's character, and yet told a story to exonerate himself. His friendship appeared feigned, and Cuthbert doubted if he would really tell Juliet at the appointment. "That young man's in trouble," thought Mallow. "He is anxious about Hale, and I shouldn't wonder if that respectable person has lent him a large sum of money. Probably he counts on getting the money from Juliet should she inherit the fortune of Miss Loach. Also, he seems annoyed that I should have been in Caranby's unfinished house at night. I wonder what he would say if he knew my reason for going there. Humph! I must keep that quiet. The only person I dare tell is Juliet, but I can't speak to her about the matter just yet. And after all, there is no need to mention my visit. It does not concern her in the least. I wonder—" Here Cuthbert stopped, struck with an idea. "By George! Can it be that Basil was near Rose Cottage on the night the crime was committed? Juliet may know that, and so, fearful lest he should be accused of the murder, asked me to stop the proceedings. Can Basil Saxon be guilty? No." Mallow shook his head and resumed his walk. "He has not pluck enough to kill a fly." After this he dismissed the matter from his thoughts, and waited expectant of a letter from Juliet. None came, and he was convinced that Basil had not delivered the message. This being the case, Cuthbert determined to act for himself, and one afternoon went down to Rexton. That same evening he had an appointment with Jennings, who was to bring Susan Grant to Mallow's rooms. But the young man quite expected to be back in time to keep the appointment, and meantime he spent